It's the difference between doing opportunity pursuit, pursuing opportunities, and positioning for opportunities.
Hello, welcome to the Optimize podcast brought to you by VisibleThread. We're here in Series 5. I'm Matt Light, and today I'm being joined by Georgina Ayilara, who is the head of tendering at Cyclife UK. Thanks, Georgina, for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Matt.
Yeah, no problem at all. So we're going to spend the time today talking to Georgina about capture, and specifically capture from a UK perspective. Now, Georgina, as I said, is the head of tendering at Cyclife UK, but has spent over 10 years in bidding with loads of major organisations that many people are going to be familiar with. So Thales, Serco, Rolls-Royce, PwC, Boeing, some great big names in there. Georgina's got a really keen focus on capture-led growth and shaping opportunities with customers pre-tender. And she's also recently authored a white paper in the space of capture called Current State of UK Capture, which I'm hoping we're going to be able to talk about a little bit more, Georgina, as we go through. So really looking forward to that.
Yeah, likewise.
So I wanted to start just by talking a little bit about your career and particularly kind of your interest in the capture space. So that passion that you have for capture and that focus that you have on it in bid process, just talk me through to start with. How did that develop during your career? How did you find that specific passion for capture?
Sounds like, how did we get here, Matt?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very, very good question, good to reflect on, really. So for me, capture started, or the interest in capture started way before I even knew or had heard of capture, in fairness. I know at university I loved marketing, anything to do with, customer needs, understanding the customer, voice of the customer, just the idea really of delighting customers. I really love that. And all my high scoring, you always have your favourite assignments and tutors, don't you? And for me, that was all marketing. So it was something that I could go in and remember, and that's when you've got a passion for it. So during my time at university, I was also working, and I did some custom procurement projects at British Gas. So again, really looking at customer journey, all about understanding the customer. And I also did a placement at a West African airline on customer loyalty and branding. And for me, I've always been fascinated to some point a lot more on services, or at least at the start of my career, how services are packaged. It's all about experience, isn't it? And all that was really interesting for me. So then when I left university, moved into industry, I went into project management. But I always found myself drawn by, the front end part of the customer and commercial side of the organisation. And so I was supporting, so it was at Thales, and they were quite fortunate how I was positioned as in project management, but they joined up projects as well. So you see the handover for bidding. And so at that time, bid team that I was supporting as the project side, a few of them fell sick. So that, of course, wasn't positive. I did step in to that bid team. And since then, I just found a love for bidding. And since then, I've never left bidding after that busy period of, stepping in when a few of the bid team were sick. So over, as you mentioned, the last, especially at the very early stage of bidding, what really stood out to me was how much of the opportunity was won or lost before the proposal writing had ever started. So I was really pulled towards capture from the start, really, understanding how organisations position themselves early, understanding customer needs, ensuring delight moments. I think will relate to all the customer touch points throughout the procurement and then contract delivery journey. So for me, well, that is capture, isn't it? So
Yeah.
Again, all that, the fact it led to customer growth and growth of the business, and all of that was just what I had a passion for, and it's just naturally progressed from there, really.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's something that we should definitely all be thinking about a lot more, isn't it, in terms of that voice of the customer and in our bids, but probably something actually that we don't.
Mm, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Sadly, isn't it? It's always easy, as we know, with other pressures and especially the time pressure, isn't it? But definitely something we need to be focusing on, even if it's just done simply. It's just a thought, isn't it, to shape our thinking, the context of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we're going to talk about capture throughout this time that we've got together, Georgina. But one of the things that I guess I've found, particularly in doing the research and reading the white paper that you wrote that we'll touch on a little bit more later, is that there just seems to be so many kind of definitions or thoughts about what capture is. So, for the purposes of this conversation, what's your kind of go-to definition for capture?
So for me, it is summarised by it's the difference between doing opportunity pursuit, pursuing opportunities, and positioning for opportunities. So that's the sentence. I won't do a diplomatic, going into a longer than a sentence. So it is the difference between opportunity pursuit and positioning for opportunities. So if we break that down a little bit, the opportunity pursuit suggests we're chasing opportunities, doesn't it? Whereas for me, the capture is we're proactively positioning for opportunities, and it's all those things that's done before a bid is released, and it's achieved through the understanding of the customer, as we've spoken about, just shaping of the opportunity in terms of our, marketing efforts, what we do to help the customer shape and bring their problems to procurement opportunities and that type of thing. And then how we align the business internally to respond to those procurements once they come out. So that to me is a sentence or two on capture. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but it's probably worth noting for me, hopefully listeners have picked up on it already, it's organisation wide, so it isn't just the bidding activity and isn't just a pre-bidding activity. It goes right from, the very start of a business life cycle, as it were. So whether that's marketing or business development, and it spans right the way across to project delivery, still have that role in capture, still like meeting customer needs and feeding back customer insight.
Do you know what I love immediately, Georgina, is that's the best defined and clearest articulation of capture I think I've ever heard. So I hope everyone has really listened and heard that. And yeah, I think you're actually right. And I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but as you say, capture is definitely that business wide, isn't it? With that, I think we need to know exactly how we fit into that as bidding people, don't we?
Yes.
To make sure that we can articulate the value that we're adding in getting involved in those activities. And I know we're going to touch on that later on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, everyone's got a role to play in it, haven't they?
They do.
Yeah.
So with all of those kind of other definitions flying around, and the fact that people at the minute in the UK particularly do kind of see capture in different ways, why do you think there is that inconsistency at the moment? Why do you think capture is this sort of mystical, misunderstood thing in organisations at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's so many different ways and interpretations of it, isn't there, really?
Yeah.
I agree. I think the white paper touches on quite two or three key areas. So I think really what jumps out to me is this whole thing that, and we've touched on it before, haven't we, Matt, that it's only for the big bids, it's only for like the major pursuits, and it has to be, the full capture that's 18 months look ahead, and it's for multi-million-pound deal, when in reality it's capture is scalable, and the principles that we will be talking about today, understanding the customer, influencing, shaping our position as we go to market, knowing competition, and that internal alignment or capability of a business to go forward and respond to procurement, all those things are scalable. They can all be done in small bits. They can be done by one person or the whole team. So I think that's one of the big reasons. I remember being at fortunate enough to be at some of the APMP Capture Focus Group events last year, and just networking, talking to some of the community, and it's quite clear that Capture's misunderstood a lot, that it's for a bigger opportunity. Oh, it's not needed for the private sector, or it's not needed for framework, it's not needed for sole source opportunities, when actually good capture is for all of those. It's not just about the size of an opportunity. It's about, well, for me, applying that right level of thinking. So if it's a sole source opportunity, the customer could still say no. So we still need to bring all those principles of capture, understanding the customer, how we position it, how we take in the best of our organisation to that customer. Same for frameworks. It might be that we don't have to be the only one supplier, because it's maybe, I don't know, a framework with 5 positions, but still, we still need to win the opportunity and get a place on the framework. And of course, as we know best, Matt, that for the most competitive pursuits and the biggest value deals, of course, capture then definitely is in its place. So I think that's one of the key reasons for misunderstanding, is it's for the big bids, when actually it's for all, really, if it's scalable. Secondly, I think the capture is also siloed, which I think is another reason why it's inconsistently applied. Can be, it's sales, it's business development, it's pigeonholed in that, whether it's a role or various roles, it's still pigeonholed in, oh, it's sales, it's a process, when actually it's a shared business winning discipline. As we said at the start of our session, everyone has a role to play, whether that's operations or export. I had a really good career defining moment in capture when export control have played a key part of a capture strategy, where project management have had a really key input in terms of shaping capture and how we go to market. So the fact that it's capture siloed really doesn't help it to be applied, because it relies on it. Really, capture at its best connects the whole business, really. And I think thirdly, as we know, and we've discussed, that the time pressure, it feels like procurement, and rightfully so, dependent on various industries. Fast procurement cycles are becoming more. We've got limited resources. We need to do more with less. I suppose that's another reason why I think outbound like capture gets deprioritised, and the risk of becoming devalued, when really it emphasises the need for capture more, really, when scalable. So they're my key reflections on that.
Yeah, and that resonates so hard, Georgina, particularly that last point. It is one of those parts of the wider holistic bid process that sometimes gets cut, like you said, because of time or resource, but it's probably the most important bit, isn't it? And we should absolutely not forget that.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. So look, we're going to get into a bit more of the meat of things now, hopefully. And I think we're going to touch on 3 key areas. It'd be great to understand a little bit more from the research that you've done for the white paper. What does good capture look like? Why does it really matter? What are the challenges and the reality of the current state of it in the UK today? We've talked about that a little bit already. And then, what's the future, and how do we get there? How do we make the practice more prevalent? So to start through that kind of roadmap, you've alluded to it a little already, but we could look at a kind of procurement cycle and bidding cycle and try and pin the tail on the donkey almost as to where we think capture really fits. Where do you think capture should really begin in the work winning cycle and process?
So personally, it starts right at the beginning of when a customer identifies a problem. So there's a strategic problem, or there's a market problem, a customer problem, or hopefully through an organisation's marketing efforts, or whatever that process is, to understand there's market intel, to understand what's going on in like customers' context. That's why we say understanding the customers one of the key principles, isn't, of capture. So as soon as there's a known problem to a customer, that for me is when capture starts. It's not just when the ITT is released. So capture for me doesn't start when the tender starts, or I think we've seen it quite often, haven't we, when the expression of, in public sector procurement, an expression of interest or PQQs released, and that's sometimes the first time the team or the business have known about it, and then we kickstart solution development and project all those like solutions that we then start developing. When I don't want to say, I think we've said, haven't we, Matt, we don't want to be idealistic and say, well, if you start capture at that point, it's not worth it, because of course it's still worth it. But from a idealistic point of view and a best practice, or what good looks like, capture would have ideally started before that expression of interest. I think probably worth pausing to try and relate it to a private sector opportunity. So capture's for all, isn't it? So for me, if we're dealing with a business to business opportunity, that could be, a business development member has spoken to a client and they've asked for a quote, or they've asked for a capability demonstration. So that's equivalent to a public sector opportunity, and there's an EOI or a PID, that type of thing. So wherever that is in the procurement process for business or private public sector, ideally, if capture has been used, we would have known that opportunity was upcoming. We would have known the customer challenges that organisation or the government are going through, whether that's through research on the desktop, which we'll come on later, which AI will potentially help us with, or whether that's through supplier engagements with public sector or business development team members going to discuss things. Whatever that looks like, capture would enable some awareness of that opportunity before its release as a formal procurement. I like to think of capture as an ebb and a flow to some point. So when capture's done well, noting that we're not abstract, that we have limited resources and there's other opportunities and we have to stick to budgets, etc., that an opportunity capture could be deployed right at the very start. We think that the customer in this sector might have a problem. There's some use cases that have been identified, or use stories. It's been something through some workshop we've done in capture, may only be an hour workshop or full week workshop, whatever that looks like. We've identified this problem. We're going to start putting out marketing material, white papers or capability demonstrations proactively to help the customer know that we're here. And then as that then progresses, internally, we'll do some qualification of that opportunity. And only when that has been identified as an opportunity that the business has agreed to, then we can deploy even more capture. So then it would, the idea that it will flow more, more effort. So it's scalable really to like the confidence that a business has in that opportunity. So of course, then by the time it becomes a formal procurement from the customer side, it's been ideally the bidder has been aware and been involved, working alongside in co-creation, I suppose, ideally with the customer on their requirements, their spec, or whatever that looks like. So that's why I think that capture really begins at the very start, really. As we've discussed, isn't it, Matt? It's always, we don't want to remove the value of capture even when, something's on a portal. So capture can still be of value content at that point, but of course it could be of less value because it's, I guess, a diminishing return, I think they call it, don't they? That not to get into finance. But yeah, that's my take on it, really. I think it always has a place, but I think it should be scalable and linked with the business case of an opportunity. So noting that it's I guess we've only got limited resources, so they need to be deployed where an opportunity can have a P-win, percentage chance of winning, really.
Fantastic. So much in there already, Georgina, that, to be honest, from a personal point of view, I'd not really thought of.
Yeah, that's refreshing.
I'm going to focus in on there. You talked about doing workshops around the capture stage. So if I was running a capture workshop as a big professional and trying to create that sort of capture strategy for my organization, if I look at it a bit like a sort of recipe, if you like, what are the key ingredients that I should be looking at making sure are in that capture strategy?
Yeah, I like that, Matt. I think it's good to know. But I like to think maybe in this instance, then capture isn't like baking a cake, because I feel like with baking you have to be so precise, don't you, with all the ingredients. That has to be timed, and it gets me quite overwhelmed with baking because I feel like if you have one in shout, there's no space for creativity. Is at some points with the basis of baking. Maybe after the icing bit there is, but that's my take. Yeah. Whereas with capture, I think there's a whole, as we said, it's open to so many, depending on resources and the context and all of that, it can be scalable and tailored. I think for me, there are 5 really key principles, key ingredients to a good capture strategy. Of course, number 1 is that customer understanding. That is it's a given, isn't it? And that can be ideally, well defined with all the functions that are brought into the solution or wherever we are in the process. I guess if we're at that ITT stage and we're only just starting to hear about the opportunity, if we start to get into reactive bidding in that sense, if we've got customer understanding, we can still shape our solution and we can still be competitive. We can have a strong approach that way. So customer understanding, 1, definitely key ingredient. 2, and link, is that win strategy piece. So how are we going to win the deal? Of course, it'd be great if we can answer that question right from the start, and we can mature that as we progress the opportunity. But of course, if that's something that, like I say, we've just got something off the portal and we're developing a win strategy, let's have an hour's workshop just to brainstorm what the customer's problems are, what their pain points are, hot buttons are, even if that's from reading a desktop, or if that's from a desktop study, or if that's from some visit report, whatever the source. Let's just have that dedicated session to understand what the customer problems are, and then looking at our solution. How are we going to win that? And ideally, how is that positioned against the competition? So yeah, win strategy and win themes, another key ingredient for that great capture strategy. Number 3, competitive awareness. So again, it could be, as an example, could be something that we've been following for some time with a key interesting term we use, don't we, bidding, ghosting the competition. I've had some funny looks over the years. Ghosting, what does that mean? So if we ghost the competition, we've had that opportunity to do that, and that's been part of our capture effort to displace competition, and that's really good. But if we've not had that privilege, as it were, still looking at the portal, this is an opportunity. So who are the competitors for this top 5, and then maybe using our Copilot or ChatGPT to just brainstorm some of those, wearing the hat of the competition. What's their likely price point? What's their likely solution? How can we overcome that? That's a key ingredient for competitiveness. Number 4, commercial realism. This, for me personally, has been one of the most enjoyable, rewarding, but challenging parts, I think, of capture. To understand, where's that rate card that we need to put together, trying to get a cash flow curve, something developed, indicative submission before it's progressed, kind of thing. Trying to get just some view. It's all based on assumptions, but just making sure that what we're planning to capture is grounded with that commercial realism, and also noting that that can also be our commercial solution. It's still something that can contribute to our win strategy. Perhaps we've gathered some intel that our competition might not be as flexible as us in terms of accepting T's and C's, or perhaps we could even, I've seen a really good capture strategy where we've been able to develop ahead of terms with a customer to get them to then reflect that into their procurement later on in the process. So it's always for us. So it's like things like that. It's a range, isn't it? A spectrum of how far we can go with it. But yeah, commercial realism is another key ingredient. And then number 5, which is probably, if I dare say, for me, the most challenging, which is organisational alignment. I think we spend, many years ago, there's somebody that said, I think it was when I was in the role of a pursuit or capture, and they were saying about what percentage is your role. If really capture should be 90%, we feel, customer facing, and then 10% internal, whereas actually it became a risk of being so internally focused, trying to bring all of the internal, all the functions and the dynamics of all of that, rather than basing it on the customer kind of things. For me, the internal and external functions, so we can look outward at supply chain, making sure we've got all of that sorted, ideally as a part of capture, whether that's just a note out to suppliers or a desktop study on what suppliers capable, how can we partner, and all of that, just based on a set of assumptions that we think our solution needs to be. Or marketing, maybe we need to put out some LinkedIn posts to position ourselves and start planting some seeds to the customer in that sense. But and also internally, even resource management, trying to give the heads up of when bidding activity is likely to increase is again a part of capture, isn't it, to make us be able to respond when the opportunity lands. So for me, a lot of capture plans focus heavily on activities and milestones, whereas for me, the strongest capture strategies and plans, you can look at them and just from ideally a few minutes read, you could easily see why the customer would select us. Why should we be the winner? Why are we the answer to the customer's problems and hot buttons, etc.? And I think that for me is, I love it when capture creates that internal alignment and decision making earlier, so that that type of capture plan is in existence. I think it just boosts. It's quite difficult in our role sometimes. I've heard people say herding cats, or that I guess like the stakeholder piece is really important. I think the best captures I've led have been when we've got that capture plan where people can see everyone's bought into it, they've contributed to it. The capture strategy is easily, read it and go, oh yeah, the customer, we know how we're going to win this, basically. And then morale and motivation is there. It's not just a list of activities, which is a part of governance. How we're going to win, how we're positioned to win. I think lastly, what underpins all of that is the mindset shift, which is also needed for great capture. I'd almost see it as like it's the circle, isn't it, which covers all those 5 points. So often we're led from a compliance perspective or process perspective, or this is our bid process and the customer must align with this. Whereas actually it's the customer. Takes me back to one that's probably one of the key exciting and things you're proud of in your career campaigns. And it is for an international customer. Bid process wasn't set up for international, it was based on UK government. I think that was one. It's for a new customer, new solution, everything was new about it. It's that the minds, we didn't get that at the time, but gradually the mindset shift saying that actually we can't just we can't superimpose our process and put that on the customer procurement process. I think at the time there's a few elements to it, but the customer didn't know what they wanted. They knew the outcome they were looking for, but they didn't know how to get there. And using the UK government process, procurement processes, that was quite different because, as you'll be aware, usually there's some form of concept, isn't there, or something that goes out to industry, whereas in the international customer, government customer, they didn't have that. So the key part of the capture strategy was to have customer workshops to shape those requirements and help effectively put that, I guess, specification together. So that was a mindset shift, and I think do it after having that as like a baseline, way forward. There was then a new process that was created for, international opportunities. So yeah, it definitely took that mindset shift, which I think underpins and can make those 5 points the most effective, or can also start to impact them negatively if that mindset shift isn't there.
So the mindset shift's really interesting, Georgina, that you've mentioned, because I think another assumption that people might make is that if you're properly invested in capture and you do it really, really well, you'll get pure win rate improvement as a result, right? And I don't perceive that is wrong,
No.
but there must be something more than that. There must be some more value and something else different that capture adds if you do it really well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that one. I think, you're right, isn't it? So it feels like, the win rate and that increase, if we're very commercially driven, it's still what's the like the order intake, isn't it, and the revenue, that will increase. When actually, of course, that's definitely the case. But for me, I think the biggest shift really isn't just about the win rate. Of course, that's really important. But for me, it's about the better decision making and the overall business efficiency that can come from good capture. So, of course, improved win rates, as you said, are definitely there. But it's about those, the smarter no bid choices, which of course then have a domino effect, don't they? If we set up that as a way of working, then that'll benefit other opportunities. It's aligning across sales and delivery and the technical functions, which I think is also another just efficiency, isn't it? Having all been the joining up of the functions. When I think back to the companies or the business units or teams where capture is fully deployed, there's been a very strong solution focus quite early on in the life cycle. So it feels like quite a positive prophecy. Once you start doing it well, then the domino effect just keeps rippling through. So of course you've got those win rates along the way, but there's the efficiencies and the solution piece, and then it benefits, of course, delivery and how the outturn of a project, and then of course the customer feedback, and then it just a positive domino effect goes from there. I think we've also got that firefighting. I'll never forget the very early stages of my career. The word firefighting came about, and it stuck with me ever since. And it's even more so true, isn't it, as we've progressed over the years? Like there's so much reactive firefighting in bidding, whereas through capture that can be reduced. So we've got the win rates, we've got efficiencies, more integration across the business, and joined up functions, but then less reactive firefighting, and overall just less wasted effort, really. A clearer understanding of how we will win, and as I said, it's a ripple effect. It just becomes more and more positive. So for me, it's good capture improves the decision quality. It's not just about the submission quality of our bids as well.
And that internal alignment bit, I think, is really interesting. And moving on to talk about the white paper. So the current state of capture that's available for anyone to download, by the way, via the APMP UK website. One of the internal alignment bit, I think, was one of the biggest challenges that you pulled out in the white paper, and certainly the gap that maybe organisations perceive themselves as doing some of this stuff better than they actually do. What would you say are like the top tips for someone in an organisation who wants to try and achieve that better internal alignment? How do we get our stakeholders and our bidding SMEs really engaged with capture and what we're trying to do there?
Yeah, that's a good one, Matt. Very, very close to my heart, as we say, don't we, in our profession. I think you made me smile. One of my mentors, in fact, only quite recently spoke about the unconscious incompetence that people have, which you've just touched on, isn't it? Is in terms of we know the value of capture, but then there's some kind of disconnect, really. But yeah, going back to your question, the stakeholders and SMEs and their engagement is like pivotal, and it's all on the journey. So for me, if capture is seen as a process or a governance step, that just immediately is like disengaged people. The best captures I've been involved in is, even if from a business perspective, it is a process and it is a governance step. It's how, as a team member in the capture team, how that could start to feel more than a process, and making all team members, depending on if we're at the start and it's just one or two, or if we're in a full capture team, we've got 15, 30 people, working on capture. If we get all of those as contributors influencing the way the capture goes, then it starts to feel good and it really starts to come alive, really. So for me, the best capture is a shared journey. As we go along in capture, we turn information into knowledge, and that knowledge then obviously becomes our intelligence to help us win. So I really love some of the best memories in capture to date have been where we'd actually even have, not to create a template, we'd have a knowledge log, and it would start with assumptions. So it depends where we are in the process, but we'd start it with what are assumptions as we're newly formed capture team or bid, depending on where we are. What are our assumptions? And then we'd actively target those to turn, and it's fine, I'd encourage people to be upfront with assumptions and not encourage assumptions. Actually a good thing to have them, because then as a team, and along as capture progresses, we can shape and understand those, maybe take some off because they become knowledge. But whatever happens to those assumptions, we're really focusing on going on the journey as a team and turning that information, whether that's from the site visits or the ChatGPT information, desktop study, whatever that input is, we're turning that information into knowledge as a team, and that's what you could do. And I found that works really well with, so you'd have I don't know if you remember the Edward de Bono hats. I learnt of those quite a while ago now, many years ago, at probably the early start of my career, but it's always stuck with me. In terms of doing the workshops, we can wear the different hats of the solution hat, the competitor hat, and how they perceive things and work through them. But yeah, using those in this instance in the capture phase, and again, it can be an hour or a full week, whatever, as a budget. It just really helps to identify the knowledge in the team from the different perspectives to shape how we're going to win the deal. And of course, as a result, that strengthens our solution and differentiation, and then it improves customer outcomes, because at each of those touch points in the procurement process, whether that's a capability demonstration or a pitch or the actual proposal, we get there, all of those touch points are improved as a result of that knowledge that we've gained as a team and being on the journey to turn into intelligence. And that really, I've had feedback from people that have been a part of the capture teams, really helps to engage and bring people along, because it's their contribution, isn't it? It's not just being done to them, as it were. Capture, I think in the past, some teams have said, we feel like capture's done to us, especially the business development sense or commercial. And actually, capture in at its best, brings all of those people together, and ideally as early as possible. But one of the things I really loved about Capture is the fact it's collaborative and discussion led, and of course then based on that real customer context. It's not just a template, as it were. So yeah, I think that teams feel genuinely involved. They're not just servicing a process. Then they're involved in driving customer value, driving business results. I think one of my key reflections we have like a bid team meeting, and on the agenda we've had like customer intel and competitive intel. So that's just an example of how Capture quite can simply be done, but we're just having, if we're aware of 2 or 3 competition for an opportunity, just by asking the bid team, so how does this impact you? Commercial perspective, how does it impact you? From a program perspective, how does it impact you? So it's quite an easy way of engaging everybody, bringing all the perspectives and embedding Capture's business as usual, really. And of course, go back to the key thing of turning that information into knowledge and then intel, which we're all contributing to. Yeah, it's quite exciting stuff, really. And it's one thing that, as I'm talking, Matt, I'm thinking it's actually quite an expensive ordeal as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, quite.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I love that bit that Georgina, of you saying that we need to make sure that our stakeholders and SMEs don't feel like it's being something that's done to them. I remember my first foray into trying to do Capture a few years ago. And yeah, my business development, it's the head of business development, turned around and said, well, can we not do this? Because it feels like you're telling my team how to do their jobs. So yeah, you definitely don't want to start off your potential Capture with that kind of tension, do you?
No, we don't want that. Yeah, no, that's it, exactly. It feels like Capture's the glue, doesn't it, that can draw that intel out. It feels like there's so many, like you said, that the BD, the on contract, like project team, like everyone has, as we've said, we don't want to be an ongoing record, but it feels like everyone definitely has that role to play, because everyone Capture's role is to draw out that information and to shape it into something to focus. So it's definitely a contribution rather than a being done to.
Yeah, absolutely. The work that you put into the white paper, Georgina, in terms of the research and then authoring it is amazing. You can see it come through. Was there anything in the research that you did for the paper that you went, oh, that's genuinely surprising? I didn't think people would feel that way, or that's not something that I would have recognised. Was there anything that kind of came out of that did surprise you?
I think the main thing has really been I guess going back to what we just said, from the mentor perspective, saying about this incompetence, it's that knowing that something is really valuable, but then they're not seeing it through. That really surprised me. Some of the insights in the white paper have been drawn from, as I mentioned, some of the events that we did in the Capture Focus Group last year. Like I say, really valuable conversations with the APMP community. But it really came across the fact that everyone's really interested and aware of Capture, but then there's definitely a disconnect between how that's applied and how quickly it can be overruled, whether that's by the process or, I guess, the budget, that they need to be reactive. So I think that was one of the biggest, I guess, surprises, as it were. The lack of integration as well. I think that was something that was surprising in terms of, as we've touched on, Capture spans all of the functions, and it's just pigeonholed into a pre-bid activity. And then there's that, the traditional handover to bidding, when actually Capture spans, of course it spans all of that. It might be that bidding becomes the owner of an opportunity, but the Capture underpins all of that. So that was something. And then also I think the bid writing. So I've always had some really good conversations with sort of bid writers in the group. And we all agreed how much bid writing is an enabler, isn't it? Right at the start, in terms of the proposals, like storyboarding, the reviews that can happen. But a lot of the people I spoke to were like, oh, they were drawn in late just to write a response, when that is such an opportunity lost. So that really stood out to me in terms of how much bid writers, and also other SMEs, in terms of the technical teams, from research I've been doing on my own, in terms of engineering, solution architects, and all of that, how they also feel to engage with too late, when actually it, of course, would have been better to have had their involvement at the start, really.
The bringing people in earlier piece, particularly as you said, the bid writing, is a really nice call out, just because another of our episodes in this series is with a bid writer who is really keen on pushing themselves into the capture space. So there's a nice little tie-in there for people who are listening, who go and listen to that one as well. So let's bring it to the future then, Georgina. And you mentioned earlier on AI, and it feels like we can't go through a conversation in bidding without talking about AI anymore. How do you see automation playing a part in capture? And for you, is it an opportunity or is it a risk?
So we'll go with an opportunity. I don't think I can be critical. I think personally, I think, as we all do, don't we? Like, professionally, I feel like there's some catching up to do when it comes to AI. But yeah, definitely opportunity. I think in terms of capture, what excites me the most with AI for capture is the fact capture's sometimes seen as this luxury, isn't it? And high budget, high outlay to do. So I think AI has a brilliant role in making it accessible for all, really. The ability to do some research in terms of like competition. I've done some what worked well before, in terms of when you don't potentially have the team. Like 5-6 years ago, there'd be a full capture team of 30 people, and each would have an input in the workshop. Whereas fast forward to today, that's not always possible. So the ability to do some, I guess, like war gaming on the companies, and put that into, I don't know, Copilot or ChatGPT or some AI tool to produce that as an output to then discuss as a smaller team, I think is brilliant. Makes it accessible, really, in terms of win strategy and win themes. We'd have well, your thoughts on that, but we can spend a lot of time, can't we? Like, as the inputs into that win strategy session. But from an AI perspective, being able to gather that quickly, the information, the competitive analysis piece, that's, I think, another accessibility factor, isn't it? In terms of, putting in, these are the competitors of my solution opportunity. What are their likely behaviours? I think all that's really good, really exciting. And of course, we need to check that it's true. In principle, I think it's really exciting that there's so many activities in capture that everyone, from a full-on corporate to an SME, can engage in capture more effectively because of AI. I think that's really, really exciting.
And that definitely mirrors, Georgina, what I've heard at a VisibleThread event, no less, about them saying that one of the big strengths of AI in capture is that research piece, and it enables you to do it much faster. So I'm glad you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, impressively so.
So to round things off then, Georgina, we've talked quite a bit about where capture currently is in the UK. If for anyone sat in a bid team, or maybe even a capture role in an organisation now, thinking, listening to this and thinking, yeah, there's so much more that I can do here with this great insight. What would you say the key changes are that bidders and capture practitioners can start to make to improve the maturity of capture in their organisations?
Yeah, that's a really good one, isn't it, Matt? I think we can't fully cover in a few minutes, as it were. Scroll worthy, I think. For me, I always have to ground myself in reminded it can be quite overwhelming, can't it, to think of all the exciting things capture can be. How do we get there? I ground myself in we start small. So that's my go-to position. We use the success of, so I guess for an example, that using those 5 principles that we mentioned at the start, the customer understanding, rich strategy, competitive awareness, commercial realism, and organisational alignment, that / internal capability to bid. We approach each of those in a small way. So whether that's, as an example, the customer understanding, having that workshop to understand the customer context for their problems and the solution, that's a win. And then using that as it progresses to what that meant for the proposal strategy and how we did the proposal maybe quicker, or whatever benefits came from that, making sure that's used for I guess like a lesson learned. As we know, lessons learned is always a key part of our bidding, isn't it? So making sure that's known so that it can be fed into the next one, and then gradually there are, I think, more of a engagement factor, I feel. Yeah. So it's definitely starting small and focusing on each of the ingredients one at a time. I think helps to break it into like a piecemeal piece. But yeah, I think the customer understanding underpins it.
That's a really nice round off, Georgina. Thank you for that. What we like to do, kind of just to wrap up on each of these, Georgina, is just do a real couple of quick fire questions at the end. Are you up for that?
Yeah, good. Yeah, why not?
Amazing. Okay. So first one then, when a bid lands and you've been part of the capture team, how do you know that you've done a really great job in capture?
So there'd be no surprises or minimal surprises in terms of the ITT, maybe the customer spec, or ideally T's and C's, but no surprises when that ITT drops, really. But the bid team are able to mobilise quickly and have a basis to work off, maybe even have a draft proposal. And win strategy and win themes are validated from reading the tender document, as in we know this is for us.
Amazing. Do you think there's a really common mistake that teams make in capture? And if you could tell them to stop doing it right now, what would it be?
Stop seeing capture as a process, and I guess stop seeing it as a sales only role.
Nice. Like that. And then on the flip side of that, if you could pick just one key thing to leave people with today to say, you should be doing that in capture right now, what would that be?
Talk about and understand your customer.
Love it. What a way to round off. That's amazing. Georgina, it's been really insightful. Thank you ever so much. I know that everybody listening is going to have got so many takeaways from this. I think some of the key ones for me would definitely be, as you mentioned at the beginning, we have to see capture less about pursuing opportunities and more about being positioned well to win them. I definitely learned a lot about how we can take people along that journey and make sure that capture is a really key embedded part of what we do without making it too process heavy. And yeah, the piece about inviting AI in to be a key part of what we do with capture and using it for research, I think is a really, really great one as well.
Great.
For people who are listening, Georgina, if they want to learn any more about capture, or if they want to get access to the white paper and have a really good read of that, where can they go to find some more detail and some more resources?
So the APMP website, we have a slot on there as a capture focus group. So it'd be great to access off there. There's also the capture focus group on LinkedIn. So it'd be brilliant for your teams to follow us. And there we hope to keep the conversation going in terms of all things capture. So yeah, those are two. And the capture, the white paper is accessible on both of those options.
Amazing. And is there a follow-up or any follow-up planned on the white paper? Are there any future ones coming that we should also look out for?
There is, Matt. Yeah, so there is a webinar which we'll be doing soon. Details to be released on that. There's also the future of capture. So we currently have the current state where we'll be working on this year, the future of capture, what that looks like. So that's really exciting.
Amazing. It feels like there's a follow-up podcast there somewhere.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely, Matt.
Fantastic. Well, Georgina, look, thanks again ever so much. Really appreciate you giving us your time and insight for this. So thank you.
It's been enjoyable. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. That's been the Optimised podcast brought to you by VisibleThread, and hope to see you again very soon. Hello.